The aroma of roasting turkey hung heavy in the air, a cruel irony given the feast about to be devoured and not the one on the table. Chloe, my daughter-in-law, stood, wine glass delicately balanced in her hand, and addressed the assembled family. Before we begin, she announced, her voice crisp and clear, "Julian and I have an important announcement." My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I had a premonition, cold and sharp, of what was to come. "We've decided it's best for everyone if we cut you off, Loretta, from this family." A stunned silence descended upon the dining room. Silverware clattered against china as hands stilled mid-motion. Even the crackling fire in the hearth seemed to hold its breath. My own breath caught in my throat, the words hanging in the air like a poisoned dart. "Cut me off," I finally managed, my voice a bare whisper. My son, Andrew, sat beside Chloe, his face carefully neutral, offering no support, no denial. "It's for the best," Chloe continued, her gaze sweeping across the faces of our extended family, all eyes now fixed on me. "Your emotional instability has been a strain, and frankly," she added, lowering her voice as if sharing a confidence, "your constant reminders of your contributions to Andrew's success are tiresome." My contributions? The years I'd poured into supporting Andrew, into building this very empire they now so casually dismissed. The endless nights, the sacrifices, the unwavering belief in him when everyone else had scoffed. I don't understand," I stammered, my gaze flitting between Andrew and Chloe, searching for a flicker of recognition, a hint of the love I thought we shared. But Andrew's eyes were averted, fixed on the centerpiece of full foliage, while Chloe's held a steely glint. "This house, this life, it's all thanks to you, Loretta," Julian chimed in, his tone laced with a condescending sweetness that made my stomach churn. "We're just trying to protect what's ours now." "Ours," I echoed, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. The mahogany table, gleaming under the chandelier's glow, the very walls that surrounded us, they were as much mine as theirs. More, even. I had been the silent architect of this fortune, the unwavering support behind Andrew's every endeavor. And now, on Thanksgiving, surrounded by family, I was being cast aside like a worn-out garment. "We'll be moving you into the garden house," Chloe announced, her voice regaining its business-like tone. "It's quaint, suitable, and we'll arrange a small allowance. Of course, enough for your needs. The garden house, a charming little cottage, yes, but a separate entity, tucked away at the edge of the property. A gilded cage." My gaze drifted to the portrait hanging above the fireplace, a painting of Andrew as a young boy, his hand clasped in mine. A wave of nausea washed over me. "My needs," I repeated, my voice gaining a newfound strength, a quiet steel replacing the initial shock. "You speak of needs as if I'm a charity case, Chloe. As if I haven't earned my place here." A flicker of annoyance crossed Chloe's face. "Please, Loretta, let's not make a scene. Just be grateful for what we're offering. Grateful for the scraps from their table, for the dismissal of a lifetime's work." A slow, burning anger began to ignite within me, a quiet fire that promised to consume all the hurt and humiliation. "Grateful," I repeated, a small smile playing on my lips. "Don't worry, Chloe. Gratitude is something I understand very well." I pushed back my chair, the scraping sound echoing in the sudden hush. "If you'll excuse me," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I have some arrangements to make." I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving behind the stunned faces and the half-eaten feast. The scent of roasting turkey no longer smelled of celebration. It smelled of betrayal, but it also smelled of opportunity. And as I walked away, I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that this was just the beginning. They thought they were taking everything from me. They had no idea what I was about to take from them. They had no idea about the Aspen Chalet, tucked away in a trust, solely in my name. They thought they knew the value of my silence. They were about to learn. Rain lashed against the windows of the garden house, mirroring the storm raging inside me. Thanksgiving, a day for family, for gratitude. "Mother, you really shouldn't expect to live here anymore," Chloe had said, her voice laced with a chilling politeness that cut deeper than any shout. "This house, it's for our family now." Julian just stood there nodding, a smug little smile playing on his lips. My family, the family I helped build, brick by brick, supporting my late husband through thick and thin, through every late night and risky venture that ultimately led to his success. And this cramped, damp little cottage at the edge of the property was where they thought I belonged. I stared out at the sodden lawn, the ornate fountain now a blurry silhouette in the gray light. Everything felt blurred, unreal. Had I really spent the last 30 years of my life pouring my heart and soul into a family that now saw me as an inconvenience? "I understand," I'd managed to say, my voice trembling slightly. "I'll pack my things." Chloe's smile widened, just a fraction. It was a victory smile, the kind a predator wears after cornering its prey. Inside the garden house, the air was thick with the smell of mildew. The furniture was old, cast-offs from the main house, pieces deemed too worn or outdated for Chloe's discerning taste. I sat on the lumpy sofa, the springs groaning beneath me, and picked up a framed photograph. It was taken years ago, on a family vacation to Aspen. We were all there, Andrew, Chloe, Julian before he was even in the picture. All of us laughing, faces lit by the winter sun. Andrew's arm was on my shoulder, his grip firm, loving. "Mom, you're the best," he'd said that day, after I'd managed to snag us a last-minute reservation at the most exclusive restaurant in town. Now he was gone, and with him, it seemed, went any trace of the love and respect I thought we shared. I ran a hand over the cold glass of the photograph. The Aspen Chalet. We'd bought it as a family retreat, a place to make memories. I remember Andrew being so excited, poring over brochures, planning ski trips, and snowball fights. He'd even talked about bringing his future children there someday. Now, that future belonged to Chloe and Julian, a future I was no longer a part of. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, mechanically packing a small suitcase with a few essentials. The rain continued to fall, a relentless drumming against the windows. It felt like the world was weeping with me. I barely registered the knock on the door until it came again, louder this time. "Mother, are you in there?" Chloe's voice, sharp and impatient. I opened the door, my heart pounding in my chest. "Julian, and I need to discuss something with you." She pushed past me into the cramped living room, Julian trailing behind her. "We've been thinking," Chloe began, her eyes darting around the small room with a barely concealed look of disgust. About the arrangements, Julian cleared his throat. We've decided it's best if you're locate. Somewhere Resmiller. He gestured vaguely with his hand. Perhaps a retirement community. I stared at them, speechless. A retirement community. I wasn't even 60. I still had so much life left to live. We'll, of course, cover your expenses, Chloe added quickly, as if that somehow softened the blow. Within reason, naturally. Expenses. I finally found my voice, though it was barely a whisper. From what? Everything is in Andrew's name. Chloe and Julian exchanged a look. It was a look of barely concealed triumph. Precisely, Julian said smoothly. And now, everything belongs to Chloe, as his wife. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. And your generous allowance, of course, depends entirely on our goodwill. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. The anger, the hurt. It was a physical ache in my chest. But something else was there too. A quiet resolve, a steeliness I hadn't known I possessed. Actually, I said, opening my eyes and meeting their gaze. There seems to be a slight misunderstanding. Chloe frowned. Misunderstanding? About what? About the trust, I said. My voice now steady, calm. The Andrew Hawkins family trust. Their smiles faltered. A flicker of unease crossed Julian's face. What about it? Chloe asked, her voice tight. I dissolved it. I said simply. The blood drained from their faces. Chloe's jaw dropped. Yowit. I dissolved it. I repeated, enjoying the shock etched on their features. Yesterday morning, before Thanksgiving dinner, Julian stepped forward, his face flushed. You can't do that, he sputtered. It's Andrew's money. It was, I corrected him. The trust was structured in such a way that, upon Andrew's passing, control reverted to me, a little detail your lawyers seem to have overlooked. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick folder. These, I said, placing the documents on the rickety coffee table, are the new distribution papers. As you'll see, the bulk of the assets, including this house, the company, and yes, the Aspen Chalet, are now under my sole control. Chloe snatched up the papers, her hands shaking. Her eyes scanned the pages, her face growing paler with each line she read. Julian peered over her shoulder, his mouth agape. But dot the money, he stammered. The 82 million. I met his gaze, a small smile playing on my lips. Let's just say, I said, my voice soft, I have plans for it. Plans that don't involve you. I stood up, smoothing down my skirt. Now if you'll excuse me, I have some packing to undo. I walked towards the door, leaving them standing there, stunned into silence, amidst the damp and the decay of the garden house. The rain had stopped, and somewhere I knew the sun was beginning to shine. Rain lashed against the windows of the garden house, mirroring the storm raging inside me. Just until you calmed down, Mother, Chloe had said, her voice dripping with false concern. It's for the best. The best for whom? I wondered, pulling a thin blanket around my shoulders. The best for her and Julian, no doubt, who now saw themselves as heirs to everything Andrew and I had built. The garden house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage. It had always been my retreat, a place where I sketched designs, nurtured seedlings, and escaped the constant demands of Andrew's burgeoning business. Now, it was my prison. You understand, Chloe had continued that dreadful Thanksgiving evening, after her shocking announcement that they were cutting off my allowance. We need to be prudent with the family finances. Prudent. The word echoed in the small space, mocking the years I'd spent meticulously managing our household budget, stretching every dollar so Andrew could reinvest in his company. I had been the silent partner, the unseen hand that kept our lives running smoothly while he chased his ambitions. And this was my reward. Banishment to the garden house, treated like a fragile, senile woman. I looked around at the familiar objects, the worn wicker chair, the terracotta pots lining the shelves, the small writing desk where I'd penned countless letters and balanced countless checkbooks. Everything whispered of a life I'd lived, a life I'd helped create, a life they now presume to control. You'll have everything you need here, Mother, Julian had chimed in, his smile as fake as the orchids Chloe favored. We'll make sure you're comfortable. Comfortable. As if comfort could compensate for the blatant disrespect, the casual dismissal of my contributions. They thought I was oblivious to their whispers, their plans to redecorate the main house, to trade in my sensible sedan for a flashy sports car. They saw me as a relic of the past, an obstacle to their lavish future. I rose and walked to the window, watching the rain blur the lights of the main house in the distance. A strange calmness settled over me, a quiet resolve that surprised even myself. They thought they had won. They thought they had silenced me. They had underestimated me. I had poured my life into that family, into that business, and I wouldn't let them erase me so easily. I knew where everything was. Every account, every asset, every meticulously documented transaction from the past 30 years. Andrew, bless his trusting heart, had left it all to me, believing I would always act in the best interest of the family. He never anticipated this, never imagined his own son and daughter-in-law would treat me with such callous disregard. I returned to the writing desk, pulling out a pad of paper and a pen. The familiar weight of the pen in my hand was grounding. It was time to remind them who I was, time to remind them of the power I held. I began to write, carefully outlining each asset: the house, the company shares, the Aspen Chalet, the various investment accounts. $82 million. A fortune Andrew and I had built together, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. A fortune they now believed was theirs for the taking. I worked late into the night, the rain a constant backdrop to my quiet rebellion. The plan formed slowly, meticulously, each step a calculated move in a game they didn't even know they were playing. They had assumed I was a helpless old woman, easily dismissed and forgotten. They were wrong. I was the architect of their world, and I was about to redraw the blueprints. The Aspen Chalet. Chloe had always adored that chalet. She'd spent hours poring over design magazines, dreaming of redecorating it in her own style, filling it with her friends and their endless social gatherings. She'd even talked about hosting a lavish New Year's Eve party there, a celebration of their newfound wealth and status. A faint smile touched my lips. Perhaps she would get her New Year's Eve party after all, just not the one she was expecting. I added a final note to my plan, a small detail that would ensure the message was delivered loud and clear. They thought they could control me, confine me, erase me. They had no idea what was coming. The rain continued to fall, washing away the last vestiges of my grief and resentment, leaving behind a steely determination. I closed my eyes, imagining Chloe's face when she realized the truth. The anticipation was almost as satisfying as the revenge itself. Tomorrow, the game would begin. Rain lashed against the corrugated iron roof of the old Hawkins timber mill, a sound I once found comforting. Tonight, it felt like a mournful cry echoing the hollowness in my chest. Chloe's words, "You're nothing without Andrew," bounced around my skull sharp and cold as the November air. I ran a hand along the rough, splintered wood of a workbench, the same workbench Andrew and I had used to build our first rocking horse for his little sister, Sarah. Sarah, gone these past 5 years. Now Andrew too, and here I was, banished to the garden house, treated like a forgotten relic in the very place I'd helped build. The mill was silent now, the saws, and plainer still. Dust motes danced in the single bare bulb hanging precariously from a rafter. I remembered the day we installed that light. Andrew, barely a teenager, perched precariously on my shoulders, giggling as he fumbled with the wiring. "Careful, Mom," he'd yelled, his voice cracking with the onset of puberty. "Don't drop me." I hadn't. I'd held him steady, just as I'd held this entire family, this entire business, steady for so many years. I traced the outline of a saw blade hanging on the wall, its teeth dulled with age. It was a relic from my father's time, a time when this mill was just a dream, a whispered conversation over kitchen tables, and late-night blueprints spread across the linoleum floor. My father, a man of few words but immense vision, had instilled in me the importance of hard work, of quiet dedication. He'd taught me how to read a ledger before I could read a novel, how to swing a hammer before I could ride a bike. "A woman needs her own tools, Loretta," he'd said, handing me a miniature hammer, its handle smooth and worn from his own calloused hands. Those lessons had served me well when I met Andrew, a young man brimming with ambition, but lacking the practical skills to turn his dreams into reality. He had the charisma, the charm, the ability to sell ice to Eskimos, as they used to say, but it was I who pored over the contracts, I who negotiated with suppliers, I who kept the books balanced and the bills paid. While Andrew schmoozed clients and investors, I was here, in the mill, sleeves rolled up, ensuring every piece of timber was cut to perfection, every order fulfilled on time. I remembered the late nights, fueled by lukewarm coffee and Andrew's infectious enthusiasm. "We're going to make this the biggest timber mill in the state, Loretta," he'd declare, his eyes shining with that familiar fire. And we did. Together, or so I thought. Now, Chloe, with her perfectly manicured nails and designer handbag, waltzed around the newly renovated Hawkins mansion, acting as if she'd built this empire brick by brick. "This place could use a little updating," she'd remarked snidely on her first visit to the mill, wrinkling her nose at the sawdust and the smell of fresh-cut pine. "Perhaps a spa or a yoga studio." Julian, ever the sycophant, had nodded in agreement. "Brilliant, darling," he'd murmured, his eyes glued to his phone. "Absolutely brilliant." The rain continued to fall, a steady drumbeat against the tin roof. I closed my eyes, breathing in the familiar scent of sawdust and pine, a scent that spoke of hard work, of sweat and toil, of a lifetime dedicated to building something lasting, something real. I opened my eyes and looked around the dimly lit mill, a ghost of a smile playing on my lips. They thought they had won. They thought they had pushed me aside, relegated me to the sidelines. They thought I was nothing without Andrew. They had no idea. They didn't know the first thing about the foundation upon which their comfortable lives were built. They didn't know about the quiet strength, the unwavering resolve that had held this family, this business, together for all these years. I walked over to the old safe tucked away in the corner, the one Andrew had always insisted on keeping, even after we'd moved to the new office downtown. He'd thought it was just a sentimental relic, a reminder of our humble beginnings. He'd never known its true purpose. He'd never known about the documents I'd kept locked away inside, the documents that would change everything. I spun the dial, the familiar clicks echoing in the silence. The heavy door swung open, revealing a stack of papers, yellowed with age, but still bearing the weight of their significance. My father's will, the original deed to the mill, and the document that would ensure my future, the document that would remind them all of the woman they had so casually dismissed, the woman they thought was nothing. The rain outside intensified, the wind howling like a banshee, but inside the old mill, a sense of calm settled over me. I knew what I had to do. I knew how to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I knew how to show them all, Chloe and Julian especially, that I was far from nothing. I was just getting started, and they were about to learn a very valuable lesson about underestimating the quiet woman in the shadows, the woman who held all the cards. The muted sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows of St. Alden's Chapel did little to warm the chill that had settled deep in my bones. Andrew stood at the pulpit, his voice echoing through the cavernous space, delivering a eulogy that felt like a slap in the face. "My father," he began, his voice thick with manufactured grief, was a visionary, a self-made man who built an empire from the ground up. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled mourners. "He taught me everything I know." I shifted uncomfortably in the pew, the hardwood a stark reminder of the hardness in my heart. "Everything you know," I thought bitterly. "And what about the woman who stood beside him for 30 years? The woman who poured her heart and soul into that empire, the woman who is now being erased from the narrative as if she never existed." "He was a giant," Andrew continued, his voice rising with emotion, "a titan of industry who left an indelible mark on this world. He spoke of his father's business acumen, his philanthropic endeavors, his unwavering dedication to his family. He was," Andrew choked back a sob, "a performance I'd seen too many times to be moved, the best father a son could ask for." He looked directly at me then, his eyes filled with what I could only interpret as a mixture of pity and triumph. "He provided for us, cared for us, shaped us into the people we are today. Provided for us." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations. The eulogy droned on, each carefully chosen word a further twist of the knife. Not a single mention of my contributions, not a whisper of the countless hours I had spent working alongside my husband, building the foundation of what Andrew now so readily claimed as his own. "Dad always said," Andrew declared, his voice ringing with false sincerity, Family comes first. I almost laughed out loud at the irony. Family comes first, unless that family member happens to be the inconvenient widow who might want a share of the pie. He instilled in us the importance of hard work, of perseverance, of never giving up on your dreams. I felt a surge of anger rise within me. My dreams, the dreams I had sacrificed, the dreams I had buried beneath the weight of supporting my husband's ambitions. Where were those dreams now, lost in the echoes of Andrew's self-serving narrative? He went on, painting a picture of a perfect father, a flawless husband, a man who could do no wrong. It was a sickeningly sweet portrayal, so far removed from the reality of the man I had known that I almost felt like I was at the wrong funeral. After what felt like an eternity, Andrew finally concluded his eulogy. He stepped back from the pulpit, his face streaked with tears, basking in the sympathetic glances of the mourners. I remained seated, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, my face a mask of composure. Inside, though, a storm was brewing. The injustice of it all, the blatant erasure of my role, the callous disregard for my feelings, it was more than I could bear. As the organ music swelled, and the mourners began to file out of the chapel, I stayed put. I needed a moment to collect myself, to regain my equilibrium before facing the inevitable onslaught of condolences and veiled inquiries about my future. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to find a center of calm within the swirling chaos of my emotions. And then I saw it, a vision clear and sharp, of the document I had signed just yesterday, the document that would change everything, the document that would rewrite the narrative. A small, almost imperceptible smile played on my lips. Andrew's performance had been convincing, certainly, but it was just that, a performance. He thought he had one, that he had successfully secured his inheritance, his future, his empire. He thought he had relegated me to the sidelines, a silent, forgotten figure in the background of his triumph. He was wrong. I opened my eyes, the faintest glimmer of steel in their depths. The game, my dear Andrew, has just begun. The document, safely tucked away in my lawyer's office, was my ace in the hole. The dissolution of the family trust, carefully orchestrated and executed without his knowledge, was my silent revenge. He had spoken of his father's legacy, of the empire he had built, but what he didn't realize was that the foundation of that empire, the bedrock upon which it all rested, was me, and I was about to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I rose from the pew, my movements deliberate and steady. The chill in my bones had vanished, replaced by a burning resolve. As I walked out of the chapel, into the bright sunlight of the afternoon, I knew that everything was about to change. He would learn soon enough. Christmas in Aspen would be different this year. The stained glass windows of St. Alden's Chapel cast long, colorful shadows across the polished wooden pews. I watched as Malcolm's casket was slowly lowered into the ground, the finality of it all sinking in like a stone in my stomach. It had only been a week since that dreadful Thanksgiving dinner, since Chloe Hawkins had declared me a relic of the past, a burden they no longer wished to carry. "You're just a drain on our resources now," she'd sneered, Julian nodding his silent agreement. The words echoed in my ears, a discordant counterpoint to the somber hymns being sung. I shifted my weight, the expensive silk of my dress rustling softly, a dress Malcolm had picked out for me, for a gala we attended years ago. He'd loved seeing me in silk. "It suits you," he'd whispered, his eyes twinkling. He always appreciated the quiet work I did behind the scenes, managing the household, raising our children, entertaining clients. He'd never once made me feel less than equal, unlike Chloe. "Don't you see, Loretta?" Chloe had said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You deserve to rest. We'll take care of everything. Take care of everything. Take care of the company Malcolm and I built together, brick by brick. Take care of the fortune I'd helped amass, scrimping and saving in the early years, reinvesting every spare penny. We appreciate everything you've done." Julian had chimed in, his tone just as condescending as Chloe's. Appreciate. A hollow word, devoid of meaning. They didn't appreciate anything. They saw me as an obstacle to be removed, a hurdle on their path to the $82 million fortune. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filled my nostrils. This place, this chapel, held so many memories. Malcolm and I had been married here, right in this very spot, almost 50 years ago. We'd renewed our vows here on our 25th anniversary, a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by our closest friends and family. "You're the rock of this family, Loretta," Malcolm had said to me that day, his voice thick with emotion. "I wouldn't be where I am without you." He meant it. He'd always acknowledged my role, my silent but crucial contribution to our shared success. But they, Chloe and Julian, they saw nothing of value in my years of dedication. They saw only dollar signs, a vast fortune ripe for the taking. They thought they could simply discard me, shunt me off to the garden house like some forgotten piece of furniture. They underestimated me. They thought I was weak, pliable. They were wrong. I opened my eyes, a flicker of steel entering my gaze. The priest continued his eulogy, his words washing over me like a gentle rain. I wasn't really listening. My mind was elsewhere, racing, calculating. I'd spent weeks plotting, planning, strategizing. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I'd consulted with lawyers, accountants, financial advisors. I'd pored over every document, every contract, every legal clause. I'd learned ins and outs of the family trust, a complex web of investments and holdings that Malcolm had established years ago. He'd thought it would protect our family, secure our future. He hadn't anticipated the vultures circling, waiting to pick at the carcass of his legacy. "It's all for you and the children," he told me when he first set up the trust. "I want to make sure you're all taken care of." Taken care of. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. I would take care of myself. The funeral procession began to move towards the cemetery gates, the mourners shuffling along in somber silence. I fell in step behind Malcolm's casket, my face veiled, my emotions hidden. Chloe and Julian walked beside me, their faces etched with grief. Or was it something else? A flicker of anticipation. Perhaps they had no idea what was coming. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully ousted the old woman, the unwanted burden. "Mother," Chloe began, her voice soft, almost gentle. "We were thinking, after everything settles down, perhaps we could discuss your living arrangements. discuss my living arrangements, as if I were a child needing their permission. Yes, Julian added. We want to make sure you're comfortable, confined, controlled. That's what they wanted. I stopped, turning to face them. There's no need to discuss anything, I said, my voice calm, steady. A small smile played on my lips. I've already made my arrangements. Chloe frowned, a flicker of unease crossing her face. What do you mean? She asked. I mean, I said, my voice hardening, that I've dissolved the family trust. The color drained from Chloe's face. Julian's jaw dropped. What? He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. How Malcolm trusted me implicitly. I replied, my gaze unwavering. He gave me the power to make decisions, to protect our family's interests, and that's exactly what I've done. I paused, letting the words sink in. The assets, I continued, have been redistributed. The house, the company, the chalet in Aspen, they're no longer part of the trust. Chloe's eyes widened in disbelief. But where are they now? She asked, her voice trembling. Safe, I said simply. Very safe. I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there, stunned and speechless, amidst the tombstones and the shadows of St. Alden's. The crisp autumn air felt invigorating against my skin. I had a plane to catch. The Caribbean sun was calling. Rain lashed against the windows, a relentless drumming that mirrored the anxiety churning in my stomach. It was the 12th day since Malcolm's funeral, and already the vultures were circling. Mother, we're here to help you pack. Chloe's voice, brittle and sharp as ice, cut through the quiet of the house. She stood in the doorway, Julian hovering behind her, both radiating an impatience I found both infuriating and oddly amusing. Pack, I asked, feigning confusion. Pack what? Dear. Chloe shifted her weight, a manicured hand fluttering to her perfectly coiffed hair. Your things, Mother, for the garden house. Oh, that. I let a small, almost imperceptible smile play on my lips. I seemed to have misremembered. I thought I was staying here, in my home. Julian cleared his throat, stepping forward. Mrs. Hawkins, with all due respect, the house, like everything else, now belongs to Andrew. It's best you move your belongings. Before he trailed off, leaving the unspoken threat hanging in the air. Before what? Julian, I asked, my voice deceptively soft. He blinked, taken aback by my calm demeanor. Chloe, however, was less patient. Before we have to arrange it for you, she snapped. We have a lot to do, Mother. Wedding plans, house renovations. She ticked off the items on her fingers as if reminding me of my insignificance in their grand scheme. The Aspen chalet needs a complete overhaul. Julian's family is joining us for Christmas. And Christmas, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Aspen, our chalet. Malcolm and I had spent our happiest moments there, nestled in the snowy mountains, far from the clamor of city life. Now, Clay was blithely discussing redecorating it, as if it were merely another acquisition, another trophy to display her newfound wealth. I rose from the sofa, my joints creaking in protest. Very well, I said, my voice steady. I suppose I should pack. Would you care to help me decide what to take? Chloe and Julian exchanged a look, a mixture of relief and suspicion flickering in their eyes. They clearly expected a fight, A dramatic outburst, anything to confirm their narrative of the frail, confused widow. They were going to be sorely disappointed. Of course, Mother, Chloe said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. We wouldn't want you to forget anything important. I led them through the house, a silent tour of my life with Malcolm. I paused in the library, running my hand over the spines of his beloved first editions. These, I said, my voice barely a whisper, these are important. Chloe waved a dismissive hand. Honestly, Mother, I doubt you'll have much time for reading in the garden house. I ignored her, moving on to the master bedroom, where Malcolm's clothes still hung in the closet, his scent lingering faintly in the air. And these, I said, my voice catching slightly. Chloe rolled her eyes. Sentimental clutter, she muttered under her breath. Just get rid of it. Finally, we reached the study, the heart of Malcolm's empire. Here, behind locked doors, were the files, the documents, the proof of my silent partnership in his success, the proof they were so determined to ignore. And this, I said, placing my hand on the heavy oak desk, is where the real treasures are kept. Chloe and Julian looked at each other, their expressions a mixture of confusion and greed. Treasures? Julian asked, his voice laced with skepticism. What treasures? I smiled, a genuine smile this time, one that reached my eyes. The kind that can't be packed in boxes. Julian, the kind that determine who truly owns this house, this company, everything Malcolm built. I turned to Chloe, my gaze unwavering. You see, dear, while you were busy planning weddings and chalet renovations, I was busy securing my future and, perhaps inadvertently, dismantling yours. Their faces paled, the blood draining from their cheeks. They finally understood, the realization dawning in their eyes like a slow sunrise. They had underestimated me. They had dismissed me as a grieving widow, a harmless old woman. They had made a grave mistake. What do you mean? Chloe stammered, her voice barely audible. I said, my voice ringing with newfound authority, that the family trust, the one Malcolm so meticulously crafted, is no more, dissolved, redistributed. And guess what, dear? The garden house isn't the only property getting a new occupant. I opened the desk drawer, revealing a thick file embossed with the words Hawkins Family Foundation. I pulled out a single document and handed it to Chloe. It was a deed, transferring ownership of the Aspen Chalet, their cherished Christmas retreat, to a local children's charity. Chloe stared at the document, her eyes wide with disbelief. Julian snatched it from her hand, his face contorting with rage. You can't do this, he sputtered. Oh, but I already have, I said, my voice calm and unwavering. And this, I added, pulling out another document, is the deed transferring ownership of this house, not to Andrew, but to the same charity. It seems they're in need of a new headquarters. The color drained from Julian's face. He looked at Chloe, then back at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and fury. Chloe's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. She began to cry, the tears streaming down her face, ruining her meticulously applied makeup. This isn't fair, she wailed. It's all ours. It belongs to us. It belonged to Malcolm, I corrected, my voice steely. And now, I added, turning to leave the study, It belongs to someone who will appreciate it. I paused at the doorway, glancing back at them, their faces a mask of shock and despair. As for your Christmas plans, I said, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. I suggest you start looking for alternative accommodations. The Aspen Chalet is booked. Sunlight streamed through the French doors of the converted pool house, warming the terracotta tiles beneath my bare feet. This is cozy, Chloe had said, her voice dripping with a false sweetness that set my teeth on edge. Perfect for someone downsizing. Downsizing. That's what they called stripping me of everything I'd helped build. This little oasis, tucked away behind the sprawling estate Andrew and I had designed together, had become my gilded cage. They thought they'd tucked me away, made me small. They had no idea. I unpacked the last box, a collection of photo albums chronicling a life they clearly thought insignificant. Each picture told a story they'd never bothered to hear. Andrew and I, young and ambitious, breaking ground on our first project, the sleepless nights poring over blueprints, fueled by cheap coffee and shared dreams, the quiet celebrations after each milestone, victories we savored together. They saw dollar signs. I saw the sweat, the tears, the unwavering partnership that had forged an empire. Julian thinks we should landscape this area, Chloe had announced the day after Thanksgiving, her eyes flitting over the meticulously tended rose bushes I'd nurtured for years. Something more modern. Julian, ever the echo, had nodded in agreement. Perhaps a minimalist Zen garden, he'd suggested, his tone implying my beloved roses were somehow offensive to good taste. We'll discuss it later, Andrew had said dismissively, waving a hand as if I were a pesky fly. Later never came. Now, looking out at the vibrant blooms, I smiled. They would never touch these roses. The phone rang, jarring me from my reverie. It was Mr. Henderson, my lawyer. Everything is finalized. Loretta, he said, his voice calm and reassuring. The trust is dissolved. The assets have been dispersed. I closed my eyes, a wave of relief washing over me. This was it. The culmination of weeks of meticulous planning, of quiet, unwavering resolve. Thank you, Charles, I replied, my voice steady. You've been a lifesaver. I walked to the small kitchenette, poured myself a glass of iced tea, and sat on the wicker chair by the window, overlooking the pool. The water shimmered in the afternoon sun, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully erased me from the narrative. They thought they had inherited an empire. They were wrong. A few hours later, Chloe and Julian arrived, their faces etched with an almost comical mix of excitement and apprehension. Mother, Chloe began, her voice strained. We wanted to talk about the future. Julian fidgeted beside her, his eyes darting around the small room. Now that things have settled, he added, his voice trailing off. I sipped my tea, watching them with a faint amusement. They were like children about to receive a much-anticipated gift, completely oblivious to the fact that the box was empty. Yes, the future, I said, setting down my glass. I imagine you're both quite eager to discuss your inheritance. Chloe's smile widened, a predatory gleam in her eyes. Well, yes, she admitted. We've been thinking about expanding the business, perhaps acquiring that property in Aspen. She paused, glancing at Julian. And of course, the house it needs some updating. We were thinking of a complete renovation. I let their words hang in the air, savoring the anticipation radiating from them. I'm glad you have such ambitious plans, I said finally, my voice laced with a touch of irony they seemed too blinded by greed to notice. However, I'm afraid there's been a slight misunderstanding. Chloe's smile faltered. Misunderstanding, she repeated, her voice laced with a hint of suspicion. Yes, I said, meeting her gaze directly. You see, the Andrew Hawkins you knew, the one who promised you a life of luxury and privilege, he didn't actually own anything. Confusion clouded Chloe's face. What are you talking about? She stammered. Julian, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, placed a reassuring hand on her arm. Mother, he said smoothly, I'm sure this is just some confusion. Andrew's will clearly stated Andrew's will, I interrupted, was predicated on the existence of a trust fund. A trust fund, I continued, letting the words sink in, that no longer exists. The color drained from Chloe's face, but the 82 million, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Gone, I said simply. Dispersed. Julian's hand tightened on Chloe's arm. Dispersed, he repeated, his voice rising. To whom I smiled, a genuine smile this time, a smile that reached my eyes. To various charities, I replied, my voice calm and steady. 2 organizations supporting causes close to my heart. Causes, I added, looking directly at Chloe, that have nothing to do with minimalist Zen gardens or Aspen chalets. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Chloe's sharp intake of breath. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Julian stared at me, his eyes wide with shock, the carefully constructed facade of politeness crumbling around him. I stood up, smoothing down my skirt. I believe I have some unpacking to do, I said, my voice light and airy. I walked past them, out into the sunlight, leaving them standing there, amidst the echoes of their shattered dreams, surrounded by the vibrant roses they would never touch. The garden house, once a symbol of their dismissal, was now my sanctuary, and I, the woman they thought they had silenced, had finally found my voice. The garden house felt different tonight, not just quieter, now that the flurry of lawyers and paperwork had subsided, but lighter. Chloe's words from Thanksgiving still echoed, sharp as shattered glass. You're nothing without Dad, Loretta. You contributed nothing. You deserve nothing. She'd said it with such venom, Julian nodding beside her like a bobblehead, eager to please his future wife. They'd wanted me gone, out of the main house, out of their lives, out of the picture of their perfect inheritance. They thought they had won. They thought they'd inherited everything, but the house felt lighter tonight. Because I was free, I sipped my tea, the warm mug a comforting weight in my hands. The garden house had always been my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the pressures of Andrew's relentless work. He'd built an empire, yes, but not alone. While he chased deals and signed contracts, I'd built a home. I'd managed the household, raised our children, nurtured the very foundation upon which his success had been built. And through it all, I'd quietly managed our finances, learning the intricacies of investments and trusts, ensuring every penny was accounted for. He trusted me implicitly, even as Chloe chipped away at that trust with her constant whispers of my supposed inadequacy. Mom was just a housewife, darling, I'd heard her tell Julian one afternoon, her voice dripping with disdain. She never worked a day in her life. I'd almost laughed. If only she knew. If only she knew how much I knew. The legal documents lay on the small table beside me, a testament to that knowledge. Dissolving the trust hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. It had been my right. Andrew had entrusted everything to me, not to them. He'd understood my worth, even if they didn't. The phone rang, startling me. It was Mr. Henderson, my lawyer. "Just confirming, Loretta," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "The transfers are complete. The funds are now securely in the accounts you specified." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," I replied, my voice steady. "You've been a great help." I hung up, a small smile playing on my lips. The Aspen Chalet, the one Andrew and I had dreamed of retiring in, was now solely mine. The company shares, the ones Chloe had envisioned controlling, were now dispersed among various charities. Causes Andrew had always supported, but never had the time to fully dedicate himself to. And the bulk of the liquid assets, those were safely tucked away in a new trust, one they would never touch. A trust for my grandchildren, should they ever arrive. A trust Chloe and Julian would have to beg permission from me to access, if they ever wanted a penny for their children's future. I walked over to the window, looking out at the moonlit garden. I could almost picture Chloe's face when she realized the truth, when she understood the extent of my nothingness. The realization wouldn't be immediate, of course. They'd likely spend Christmas blissfully ignorant, anticipating their lavish inheritance. They'd probably spend New Year's Eve boasting to their friends about their newfound wealth, about how easily they'd pushed the old woman aside. Then the new year would arrive. The lawyers would start calling. The questions would begin. And slowly, painfully, the truth would dawn. The inheritance they'd been so sure of, the $82 million they believed was theirs by right, would vanish like smoke. They'd be left with the main house. Yes, the one saddled with exorbitant property taxes they had no income to pay. The house they'd so eagerly banished me to the garden of. They would be trapped, burdened, while I would be free. I closed my eyes, picturing the Aspen Chalet, the crisp mountain air, the peace and quiet. I pictured myself sitting by the fireplace, a good book in my hands, finally free from the weight of their expectations, their greed, their disrespect. I'd spend Christmas there this year. Just me. And perhaps, just perhaps, I'd raise a glass to Andrew, thanking him for trusting me, for giving me the tools to protect myself, for ultimately giving me the greatest gift of all, the freedom to rebuild my life on my own terms. The silence in the garden house was profound, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the quiet hum of victory, and that, I realized, was a sound far more satisfying than any amount of money could ever buy.